So AMD held a keynote conference today at E3 and showed off their new hardware slated for July 7th of this year. The first half of the keynote had AMD CEO Lisa Su announce the third generation of Ryzen processors, the 39, 38, 37, 3600X, and 3600. Some notable improvements from past generations is a 15% instruction per clock improvement and twofold increase in cache size and floating point performance. While the past has shown that hardware companies can bolster benchmarks shown at conferences to hype up their audiences, initial specs seem pretty impressive, especially when prices are compared between the competition. AMD compared their higher-end 3900X 12-core 24-thread processor against Intel's 9920X, another 12-core 24-thread processor, and the 3900X was able to outperform the 9920X by 14% in single-thread performance and 6% in multi-threaded performance, all with nearly a 40% reduction in power than the 9920X and 60% reduction in price. Some gaming benchmarks were also thrown on screen, showing perhaps a 5 to 10% difference in the frame times between the 3900X and 9900K, not the 9920 that was previously shown. However, the 3900X took the lead in the majority. An example was also given of a streaming example between the Intel 9900K and the 3900X, and the difference was pretty astounding. So astounding that I personally found it a bit hard to believe. Perhaps someone with a 9900K can reproduce their tests and either confirm or challenge their results in this scenario. The same benchmarks that were given for the 3900X and 9900K were shown comparing the lesser CPUs, the 3800X against the Intel 9700K and 3600X against the 9600K. Benchmarks were very similar to the higher end with a 5 to 10% difference either way between games. At the very end, they introduced the big daddy of all their new CPUs, the 3950X, a 16-core 32-thread CPU. However, we didn't get any benchmarks from that one other than a quick nitrogen overclocking short with some record-breaking numbers that wouldn't be indicative of real-world use. Also, sadly missing from AMD's presentation was any Blender or Cinebench runs, which surprises me because AMD has always excelled at these tests compared to similarly priced Intel processors due to their core counts. I suppose we'll discover the benchmarks in workload situations soon enough, come July 7th. The prices of each processor in the 3rd Gen Ryzen families are as follows. The 3950X, $750, 16-core 32-thread. 3900X, $500, 12-core 24-thread. 3800X, $400, 8-core 16-thread. 3700X, $330, 8-core 16-thread. 3600X, $250, 6-core 12 threads. And the 3600, which is $200, and it's a 6-core 12-thread processor. So the second part of the keynote showcased AMD's new lineup of graphics cards that were boasted as being designed from the ground up. The new lineup seems to be taking notes from NVIDIA and going back to a four-number naming scheme. The RX 5700 series is built on an architecture that AMD is labeling as RDNA, which allows for a 25% performance per clock increase and a 50% performance per watt increase. It's also built on the 7nm process, is the first GPU with PCIe 4.0 support, and uses GDDR6 memory instead of Vega's high bandwidth memory. According to Lisa Su, this architecture will be modular and scalable in design. In her own words, a flexible and scalable architecture to go across every gaming platform, leading to the assumption that there might be variants of the same GPU in upcoming consoles and laptops. They talked a lot about the Xbox and PlayStation in their keynote. The RX 5700X has 40 compute units, 9.75 teraflops of compute power, 8 GB of DDR6 memory, 1905 MHz boost clock, 1605 MHz base clock, and an interesting new 1755 MHz game clock, which is supposedly the average clock you'll see while gaming. I personally like the average to be much closer to the boost clock, but we'll see how it works. The 5700X performed on par and up to 22% better than the GTX 2070 in all games shown. which is impressive, especially at the price of $449, a good $30 cheaper than the least expensive 2070. However, we don't know what game engine they ran each card on for the benchmarks. It was simply said that they ran every engine on each card and took the best scores from every game regardless of the engine that was used. So it was fair, in a way. It just means that you might have to switch up your engine for every game and run Vulkan to get the most of your RX card. At the end of the keynote, an RX 5700X Special Edition was also introduced at a slightly higher clock and compute power rate for $500 and is only available through AMD's website. So the RX 5700 comes in at slightly lower at 36 compute units, 7.95 teraflops of compute power, 8 gigabytes of DDR6 memory, 1725 MHz boost clock, 1465 MHz base clock, and 1625 MHz game clock. Compared to the GTX 2060, this outperformed the NVIDIA card from 2% to 21% according to AMD's tested games. Once again, game engines were cherry-picked on each side for their best scores. The RX 5700 is selling for $379, a price point which seems to make sense if the benchmarks are to be trusted, as that places it in the 2060 territory. Missing from AMD's notes were any mention of ray tracing. However, they did introduce some interesting software initiatives of their own, one of which is called Fidelity FX. And this is a feature that sharpens background images and makes textures pop, for lack of a better word. In practice, it might make for a deeper, more in-depth gaming experience that's not so much tangibly noticed as much as subconsciously felt. Twitchy first-person shooters and competitive gamers might not care for this feature, but single-player, story-driven games that allow the player to soak in every detail of the landscape will probably be the ones who will use this a lot. Also introduced was their lag reduction software, which uses some sort of wizardry to allow one's button input to react before the frame shows it, or something like that. It was a bit confusing to think that one's gun will be able to fire on screen before the frame shows it, and we are just talking about milliseconds here, like 15 milliseconds, so the difference will be hard to notice. But it's something that will probably have to be investigated when the cards release early next month. And that about wraps up the major events of AMD's E3 conference. Thanks for watching and listening. I'd love to hear what you all think in the comments and how much you are looking forward to seeing how well all these new parts perform. And I'll catch you next time on Pow Bam Zing.